With coverings and linings, and then we'll talk about tissue healing. So, coverings and linings are two primary types. Membranes that cover and lining are composed of two primary tissue types: the epithelium, which is bound to the underlying connective tissue proper layer. There are three types of membranes we'll talk about: cutaneous membranes, mucous membranes, and serous membranes. The cutaneous membrane is another membrane for skin, another name for skin, excuse me. It is keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium, which we call the epidermis, attached to a thick layer of connective tissue, which is the dermal layer or the dermis. And unlike all the other membranes, skin is a dry membrane, the only dry membrane in the body. We're going to talk about the cutaneous skin in the next chapter, so we're not going to deal a lot with it today. The mucous membranes are called mucous membranes because of their location, not because of their composition. They are also called mucosae. They line body cavities that are open to the exterior. So remember that the inside of your digestive system, the inside of your respiratory system, and the inside of your genital tract are actually outside world as far as you're concerned. These are all moist membranes bathed by secretion or urine. Epithelial sheets lie over a layer of loose connective tissue called lamina propria. That lamina propria is a very important part of the immune system as well, or it contains cells from the immune system. And these membranes may or may not secrete mucus. So they're not called mucous membranes because they secrete mucus. They are called mucous membranes because they line exterior cavities. Serous membranes are also called serosa. They're found in closed ventral body cavities constructed from simple squamous epithelium, which we call mesothelium, resting on a thin layer of areolar connective tissue. The parietal serosa is going to line the internal body cavity, while the visceral serosa is going to cover an actual organ. Between those is a cavity that's filled with a slippery serous fluid. These are also moist membranes for that reason. And these are, I think we talked about this before, but are also given a name based on the organ they are associated with. So the pleurae and the pericardium and the peritoneum on the lungs, heart, and abdomen, respectively. So, tissue repair. When the barriers are compromised, the inflammatory and immune response are activated. Repairs will start relatively quickly. The repair is a function of the inflammatory process. Inflammation starts it off. It can occur in two ways. We can get regeneration if we can replace the destroyed tissue, original function restored. Or if we can't, we get fibrosis, in which the connective tissue replaces the destroyed tissue, and connective tissue cannot do what the other tissues can do, so we lose some function. And in reality, there's going to be a balance in all cases between regeneration and fibrosis. So the first step, step one, is when inflammation is triggered. That causes the release of inflammatory chemicals, which dilate blood vessels, increase blood vessel permeability in the area, and begin the process of clotting in the area to kind of block off that area so that things don't spread. So inflammation sets the stage, trauma causes the injury, inflammatory chemicals are released, clotting seals off the area to other areas, and the surface clots exposed to the air will dry and form a scab. Then we get organization to restore the blood supply. So organization begins as the blood clot is replaced with granular tissue, which is capillary-enriched tissue. Epithelium starts to regenerate. Fibroblasts produce collagen fibers, bridging the gap until regeneration is complete. Debris in the area is phagocytized by cells such as macrophages. And so here we see the bridging occur, and we're beginning to fill in that gap. In the third stage, we get regeneration and fibrosis to get permanent repair. Scab will detach, fibrous tissue will mature, epithelium will thicken and begin to resemble the adjacent tissues. It can result in a fully regenerated epithelium with an underlying scar, which may or may not be visible. There we go. So the regenerative capacities of different tissues are different. Some of the ones that regenerate extremely well would include epithelial tissue, bone tissue, areolar connective tissue, denser regular connective tissue, and blood-forming tissue. There are others that can do some regeneration. They are not as easy, but they are as quick as those above. But the smooth muscle and dense regular connective tissue can regenerate to some extent. There are some tissues with virtually no functional regenerative capacity. Cardiac muscle, in particular, nerve tissue of the brain and spinal cord. There are research reports out there that some cell division does occur, but right now it does not look as though we replace any cardiac muscle or nerve tissue. There are lots of efforts underway to find better ways to regenerate them, but if you can avoid injuring them, that's still your way to go. Homeostatic imbalances, scar tissue forms in organs, particularly the heart, or it can severely impair that function, cause the organ to lose volume capacity, block substances moving through an organ, interfere with the ability of the muscle to contract, or impair nerve transmissions. Lots of things can go wrong. Scar adhesions can cause organs to adhere to neighboring structures, preventing normal function, and scarring can potentially cause progressive failure of the organ, a condition particularly true in the heart. So I'm going to quickly go through developmental aspects just because we touched on some of this during this process. So tissues develop from the primary germ layers, which from the top are ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. They're formed very early in embryonic development. They specialize to form the four primary tissue. All nerve tissue comes from the ectoderm. Muscle and connective tissue come from the middle layer, the mesoderm. Epithelial tissues can come from any of those three layers of tissue. Tissue functions well through youth and middle age if you get a good diet and circulation. Wounds and infections are kept to a minimum. As we age, the epithelial does get thin. It's more easily breached. Tissue repair becomes less efficient. Bone, muscles, tissues, nervous tissues starts to atrophy. Mutations can increase our cancer risk. But it still, as far as I'm concerned, beats the alternative. So there's those three germ layers. And that brings us to the end of this chapter.